Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Way Wednesdays virtual Midrash. We are in the book of Numbers tonight, and it is the Chukat, the ordinance of. We're looking at Numbers 19 through 22, verse 1. So, hey, let's get into it. By the way, if you don't have a really cool app, you need to get the Way Congregation app. You're going to love it. Got all kinds of cool stuff. Also, we are taking a trip to Israel in 2024. You can go to the Way Congregation and there's information. There's a tab that actually says Israel Tour 2024. Let me just actually give you guys that link. I'm put that right there in the chat so you can take a look at it. So make sure to share that. Or if you plan on coming, then definitely come with us. Check it out. It's going to be great. All right, let's get into the study. Looking forward to it as always. Numbers 19. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "This is the ordinance of the law, which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never come. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, that he may take it outside the camp, and it shall be slaughtered before him. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood 7 times directly in front of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight, its hide, its flesh, its blood, and its offal shall be burned. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet and cast them into the midst of the fire, burning the heifer. Then the priest shall wash his clothes, he shall bathe in water, and afterward he shall come into the camp. The priest shall be unclean until evening. And the one who burns it shall wash his clothes in water, bathe in water, and shall be unclean until evening. Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water of purification. It is for purifying from sin. And the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It shall be a statute forever to the children of Israel and to the stranger who dwells among them." All right, so the red heifer is all about the purification of people. Now, it's not clear in my mind as to why God commanded this. Now, we understand we have the many other sacrifices that God has for people to do. But what is so special about this one? Why does this have to be a bull that is of a red orientation? What's the point of that? It's not, again, clear. We know that the red heifer is going to be necessary for the purification of the tabernacle. And of course, there's all kinds of discussion and speculation as to when the red heifer is going to be ready for future use for the future third temple. All right. And of course, nobody knows exactly, right? There's a lot of speculation. I'm just trying to make that really clear. All right. It's interesting. And of course, it's very important. There's no doubt about that. But again, why this is so utterly significant is not clear in my mind. But this is something that God called for. And how this animal purifies people, how the ashes of this purify people, again, that's something I don't know. I don't know if this is just on a spiritual level, if there's a physical level, right? We know with the other things, the other animals that were sacrificed, that was very much a spiritual matter. Of course, it had physical implications to this whole thing, right? So when people wanted to be close to God, they needed some kind of a covering, and that is what the animal's blood provided for them. But how do the ashes of the red heifer do something even more than a regular sacrifice? Well, again, not clear in my mind what that would actually be, but it's something that God is prescribing, and it's very important for the establishment of a tabernacle or a temple, especially as we're looking toward the last days. All right, let's go on. Then let's see here. Okay, I already got that. He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with the water on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the third day and on the seventh day, he will not be clean. Whoever touches the body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall be unclean. Because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him, his uncleanness is still on him. All right, so again, somebody dies and you touch that person, you're going to be unclean. And then he needs to purify himself with water on the third day and the seventh day. Again, there's probably something very, very practical about this, right? As we go on, we see that it becomes incredibly practical. This is the law when a man dies in a tent. All who come into the tent and all who are in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel which has no cover fastened on it is unclean. Whoever is in the open field touches one who is slain by a sword or who has died, or a bone of a man or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. So now we understand, what germs are. And so germs can linger on you for some time, especially if there's not some means to thoroughly wash, right? So when surgeons go in to do surgery, right, they don't just go and wash their hands for a couple seconds. They wash their hands, right? And then they wash them again. And they have all these different ways to make sure that they are absolutely clean, right? They put on very much fresh garments. They put on all of their surgical things. All of their instruments have been sterilized absolutely, right? So there's all these different things that need to happen for complete sterilization. So back then, when they did not have all these other means for sterilization, they needed to take even more caution, right? And, as we've seen quite lately, germs are still around and they're still causing a lot of damage. And with the whole COVID outbreak, people had to be isolated for some time, right? So again, we understand that the basic principles of this, of what God is getting at here. So, you have to be set aside for some time, here in this case here for 7 days. And for an unclean person, they shall take some of the ashes of the heifer burnt for purification from sin, and running water shall be put on them in a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop and dip it in the water, sprinkle it on the tent, on all the vessels, on the persons who were there, and on the one who touched a bone, the slain, the dead, or a grave. A clean person shall sprinkle the unclean on the third day and on the seventh day, and on the seventh day he shall purify himself, wash his clothes, and bathe in water, and in evening shall be clean. All right, so the ashes are somehow used as some kind of I don't know, is disinfectant the right word, right? But it's some kind of way to purify these people. Again, I don't understand the biology or the mechanics of this, but this is something that God prescribed, and it may just go beyond our pay grade. We may say, oh, this is ridiculous. There's nothing scientific about that. Well, yeah, maybe there isn't anything scientific, but God seems to have an amazing track record. So if he says to do it, I'm going to suppose that it's pretty amazing. But the man who is unclean and does not purify himself, that person shall be cut off from among the assembly, because he has defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of purification has not been sprinkled on him. He is unclean. It shall be a perpetual statute for them. He who sprinkles the water of purification shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water of purification shall be unclean until evening. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches it shall be unclean until evening. Well, this is basically, you got cooties, and cooties are contagious, right? That's the basic idea, right? So if you're contagious, if you have germs, you can give those germs to somebody else. That's the basic sense of what's going on here. And God has a prescription for that, which is the ashes of the red heifer. Again, I don't understand the mechanics of it, but this is what God is prescribing. All right, chapter 20. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Why have you brought up the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? Feels like we've heard this basic tune before, right? I mean, this is the same thing. And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place. It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly of the door of the tabernacle to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and they fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Boy, this is an old song that just keeps playing over and over and over again. Talk about the greatest hits, right? This is what Israel keeps doing. And instead of asking God, I think this is one of the reasons God got just a little bit frustrated, is instead of asking him for things, all they did is complain about things, right? God is there in their midst, willing, desiring to give them abundantly. And all they could think about was how good it used to be back in the so-called promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, not Canaan, but no, Egypt. That's what they kept looking back to, saying, oh, it was so great back then. You've taken us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. And yeah, I can see how God would get a little bit frustrated by that. But in this passage, God doesn't get upset. It's Moses and Aaron, especially Moses, who gets upset. And hey, I can understand why Moses would get upset after yet one more time the people are complaining and they're blaming him and they're saying, why did you bring us here? Why did you bring us here? It's the same old thing. Instead of being grateful for all that Moses has done, for the many times that he's interceded for them, they keep complaining. I want to encourage us, right, that we would stop complaining against the Lord. I know it's easy to do. I have my moments, okay? I'm going to be completely honest, full disclosure, okay? I've got my moment. But some years ago, I basically decided I'm not going to complain anymore, all right? And so when I start kind of going in that direction, I got to stop and say, Lord, forgive me. I don't want to complain. I apologize. You're way better than that. Because when I start complaining, what I'm really saying is, Lord, I think you're a liar. I can't trust you. I'm start slandering him because, again, I'm calling into question his goodness. Doesn't mean I always appreciate the speed at which he does things, because it's often too slow for my taste. But I know that God is doing something above and beyond what I could even ask or think. And so I'd like to practice thanksgiving. It's such a better strategy than going to God and whining and complaining and grumbling in our prayers, right? You don't like it, and God doesn't like it either, right? And certainly here, Moses didn't appreciate it in that sense. All right, so they go from those people and they fall on their faces, and then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock and give drink to the congregation and their animals. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, so the rock. Notice that he says the rock, right? Speak to the rock. Now that is really interesting. Okay, so back in Exodus chapter 17, right? And he says, you got this rock, okay? And God says to Moses, because this is previously when they were out of water. And the Lord said to Moses, go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Right? So again, this is the greatest hits, right? They just keep playing the oldies but goodies, the same old hits, just another day. And so but notice that God goes before him. He's going to stand in front of the rock, and then Moses is going to hit the rock. So when Moses hits the rock, where's God? He's standing before the rock. Okay, so his staff then passes through God and hits the rock. That's kind of cool. All right, now it doesn't end there, right? There's more to it. All right, we also see in Psalm 104 talks about how he opened the rock and water gushed out. All right, so that's significant. Then let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul says this, moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food. All right, I'm going to stop there for a moment. Now, let's think about this really quick. They all were under the cloud. That was a real physical phenomenon. Yes, indeed. They all passed through the sea. That really did happen in a very physical sense. All right. So I'm going to try to take this out of the spiritual sense and put this into a real boots on the ground kind of scenario. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Well, that's true. I mean, they all did go through the sea and they all ate the same spiritual food. Aha. Now let's stop just for a second here. What does it mean that they ate spiritual food? Does this mean that they were just praying and then they just kind of felt full? Or did they actually eat something with their fingers and their hands, right? They take these and put it in their mouth. Yes, of course they did, right? Let's check it out. This is in Psalm 78. Actually, I'm going to cheat here because I think it gives me the address and I don't have to work so hard. All right. There we go. All right. So there we go. Psalm 78, 24. Notice what it says here. It says, he rained down manna on them to eat and gave them the bread of heaven. Men ate angels' food. He sent them food to the full. All right. So manna is called here angels' food, and it's bread from heaven. So where was this bread originating from? Well, it says it's from heaven. All right. So it's not from the earthly realm. Okay. As far as I've seen, I've never seen a cloud up there that has manna just floating around and then it starts to rain on people indiscriminately and manna comes down. That's kind of like the story, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. That's not how it works here, right? But back then, they actually had this manna coming down out from the sky, from the heavenly realm, coming down and feeding them. And so in that sense, it was spiritual bread. All right. That's really significant. Okay. Let's go back to our passage then. They all ate the same spiritual food. All right. Now we come to verse 4. This is where it gets really exciting. And all ate the same spiritual drink. All right. So they're drinking. What are they drinking from? From the rock. Did it give them real water, H2O? Yes, it absolutely did. But what was the source of that H2O? That's the question. Well, Paul's going to tell us. He says, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Wait a second. Okay, this is interesting. So they drank from the spiritual rock. Was it a real rock? Well, yeah. It wasn't just ethereal. It wasn't spiritual in a ghostly sort of sense. It was spiritual because it originated from somewhere else, someplace besides planet Earth. That's why it was a spiritual rock. And the reason it was spiritual drink is because the water that it gave did not come from planet Earth. It came from a different realm. All right. Now, where do we hear about this water? Well, we hear all about it in Revelation 22. Try that again. Revelation 22. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and from the Lamb. So where is the water coming from? It's coming from God himself. That is where this water is coming from. This is what let him come to me and he will drink these fountains of living water, right? It comes from him. Jesus is the source of this living water. That's really cool. But what Paul is also saying is that there's a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Now, this is where a lot of well-intended pastors and teachers say, well, Paul is allegorizing here. But Paul is not allegorizing. Paul is being absolutely serious. And when you go into the Targumim, which are the Aramaic translations of the Old Testament, specifically the Torah, the Pentateuch, you find that they talk about a rock that followed them. All right. There was a rock that followed them. Right. This rock was going all over the desert with them. All right. And that's what Paul is alluding to here. Right. So Paul is in agreement with the Targum, saying that there was a rock that was going with them. But what Paul is doing is saying it's not just an ordinary rock. It's not even an ordinary spiritual rock. It's not, even an ordinary miraculous rock. Okay. This is a rock, specifically, he says, is Christ. It's the Messiah. It's Yeshua. That rock was Jesus. All right. So that rock was following them in the wilderness. Now, that's an interesting perspective, isn't it? So if you have a rock that's rolling around after you, wherever you go, the rock will follow. This is kind of like the dog that follows you, but in this case, it's not a dog, it's a rock, right? So as the people would go, well, God led them, right, with the pillar of fire or cloud. And then the people followed after that. And then the rock was coming along with them. Okay. So this would have been like, okay, this rock is kind of special. It's not just some random rock over there. Hey, did you see that rock over there, Moses? Yeah, go hit it. That's not what God was doing. This is the rock, and the rock was Christ. All right. Wow. That puts it in a whole new perspective. All right. So God is telling them what to do, right? Speak to the rock. Which rock? The rock that has been following them, the same rock that had originally given them water at Meribah. Now, instead of hitting it, remember God went and stood before the rock, right? Right. And that's probably the same time when God's spirit, whatever, went upon this rock. It was probably your just an average rock to begin with, I'm supposing. And then when God stood before it, then he did something to it so that it became now known as Christ. That's how Paul could actually say that, is God did something very special, and somehow God's spirit was filling this rock. And it was Jesus, is what Paul is telling us. I don't know how God does it, but God is God. He's a lot smarter than me. All right, so now he's saying, take your rod, okay, gather Aaron and all the congregation, and this time I want you to speak to it. Don't hit it, but speak to it, all right? God is trying to show his people again and again and again that he will provide for them. He will take care of every need they have. All they need to do is ask. That's what they need to do. Sadly, the people are really slow at this point, which is terribly sad. They're just not getting it. And of course, we know that they're in a 40-year timeout, right? They came up to the promised land and they got to go check it out. And they said, yeah, it's an amazing land, but we can't do it. There's giants there, and it's never going to happen. And God got a little bit frustrated with that because he had been showing them time and again, I'm with you. I'm going before you. Don't worry about it. It's going to be good. And they said, let's stone Moses and Aaron and let's head back to Egypt. Right. So this slave mentality was stuck in their brains. And no matter how many signs and wonders they saw, they just kind of kept sticking their heads in the sand or covering their eyes and covering their ears and saying, we're not listening. We're not watching. We don't care what you do. We're not going to believe you. And so they missed it. It's terribly tragic. And so this same group of people are still mumbling and griping about all kinds of stuff. And so now Moses is starting to really feel the pressure. But unfortunately, he doesn't need to, because this is really God's deal, not his deal. This is when we can start taking on God's role instead of our role. God is God. He's got big, broad shoulders. And sometimes we feel the need that we've got to defend God. I have to defend God's honor. I'm the one that has to stand up for God. Look, we need to be careful not to deny God. That's true. But it's not our job to defend God. You know whose job that is? God's job. And you know why? Because he does a way better job at defending himself than I will ever do. Why? Because he's God, right? It's kind of simple mathematics. God can handle it. If God is who he says he is, then he can defend himself just fine. And no matter what I say is not really going to add to that conversation. Now, again, if someone asks me, about God and they're wondering, they have questions about God, well, that's when I'm to give a defense of my faith, right? And certainly we're to do that, and we should be studied, and we should, have a sense. But it's not my job to defend God. God can do that great. All right. So he's good. Trust me. Really, he can handle it. He's big and strong. All right. And so what's he supposed to do? Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock and give drink to the congregation and their animals. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock and said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock?" Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Yeah, that's going to get Moses in a bit of trouble, right? I'm almost 100% certain that the reason he had to hit it twice is because the first time God's like, "No, that's not what I said to do." But then he hit it again. And because the people were expecting God to do something, and because God wanted to show that he's faithful to the people, that he brought water out anyways, right? And we see that Moses gets in big trouble because of this, right? But Moses says, "You rebels, do we have to bring water out of the rock?" Sadly, Moses lost his temper. Now, again, I'm not throwing any stones at Moses. I don't know how he held his composure for so long. Okay. I would have gotten mad a long time ago. And, this is when you can start to get burned out in your job. I think Moses is getting a little bit burned out. Now, he's got a lot more to go. He's going to do great. No question about it. Right. But he's definitely needs a vacation, because these people are kind of driving him bonkers, and they're complaining again and again. And now he's feeling the weight of that. But to whom much is given, much is required, right? A leader is expected to go above and beyond what the average citizen is called to do. And certainly Moses, with all of the revelation that he had gotten, all the face time that he got with God, he should have done better. And those are not my words, really. Those are God's commentary on what happened. And then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe me." Wow, that's harsh, right? God is saying, you didn't believe me. That hurts. That cuts real deep. "To hallow me," or set me apart, "in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore, you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." And this was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them, right? So we read about that in Exodus chapter 17. Boy, such a small thing can have huge implications. Now, the text doesn't specifically state what he did wrong. I mean, it says, look, you didn't hallow me, you didn't believe me. But why was this such a big deal? Why was he supposed to speak to the rock? Well, I've already suggested that the reason I believe that he was supposed to speak to it is because of what Paul is telling us, that the rock that followed them was Christ, right? And remember that God went before the rock. And so then Moses was supposed to strike it because God was standing in front of the rock. So when he hit the rock, he actually hit God, right? God was struck in order to bring water out and to bring salvation to the people. Such a beautiful picture. But that only needed to happen once. After he was struck, he doesn't need to be struck again. Jesus was put on the cross, but only once. It doesn't need to happen again, right? That's one reason we as Protestants or Messianics, that we do not have a crucifix in our places of worship or in our homes. What is a crucifix? It's a cross with Jesus still on it. Now, we remember that on a regular basis, but we prefer not to have a crucifix or a physical representation of Jesus on the cross, because he didn't stay on the cross, right? He resurrected, right? So yes, he was crucified, but then he beat death, he conquered it, and he rose, right? So we prefer to really remember and think about our Lord and to worship our Lord as the risen Savior, not the crucified, still being crucified Lord. All right. So that's certainly a big distinction between Catholicism and evangelical Protestantism, whatever you want to call it. All right. So that's one reason that I think God said, look, strike it the one time, and then the next time, go and speak to it. This is such a beautiful lesson for all of us, is that Jesus was crucified for our sins to bring us salvation, but now we need to just speak to him. You just need to speak to the rock, and the rock will bring out an abundance of water. If what? If we but ask. And so often we don't ask, and that's why we don't have, because we don't ask, right? Again, simple mathematics. That is what God really seems to be getting at here in this very cool passage. All right. Now, Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship that has befallen us, how our fathers went down to Egypt, and we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers, and we cried out to the Lord. We heard our voice. He heard our voice and sent the angel and brought us up out of Egypt. Now here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Please let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, nor will we drink water from wells. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. Then Edom said to him, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. So the children of Israel said to him, we will go by the highway, and if I or my livestock drink any of your water, then I'll pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. Well, it's good to know they had to buy water back then too. All right, so we're not alone. All right, then he said, you shall not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory. So Israel turned away from him. All right, now, it's interesting. A lot of people say, oh, God is just into genocide. No, God was into a very particular people that needed to be exterminated, namely the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, Hittites, Jebusites. Who am I missing? The Amorites. Okay, so those particular people had basically made a deal with the devil. They became hybrids, right? We saw this already in Numbers chapter 13. There we saw the Nephilim, right? The sons of Anak are from the Nephilim, right? So the land of Canaan was filled with these hybrid people, and God said to take them out. But here is Edom, and they're not into all that bad stuff, okay? And so God does not have a mandate to destroy Edom. And God respects Edom's free will choice to say, no, you cannot come through my land. He could have said, you know what? Forget them. Who do they think they are? Don't they know who we are? Right? We can take them. And, right? But God doesn't do that. God doesn't say, I'm going to go before you and destroy the Edomites. He doesn't do that, right? Because it's not just a wholesale slaughter of anybody and everybody. Rather, it's a very specific, targeted slaughter, okay, of people that had made a deal with the devil. If you want to check out that more, you can go look at my book, Corrupting the Image, Volume 2. I go into all kinds of ancient history. It was a lot of fun. I think you'll enjoy it. It's on my website, douglashamp.com. You can get the audiobook if you want me to read it to you. All right. So do check that out. Okay. Let's keep moving here. Let me get a little water. Now, the children of Israel, the whole congregation journeyed from Kadesh and came to Mount Hor. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor by the border of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land which I have given to the children of Israel, because you rebelled against my word at the water of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son, for Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there. So Moses did just as the Lord commanded. They went on Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there on top of the mountain. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. Now all the congregation, when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, all the house of mourned for Aaron 30 days. All right, so I know it says here somewhere, I think he's about 100 and, let's see, he's a little bit older than his brother. His brother makes it to 120. So Aaron is somewhere in the area of 121, 122, something like that. All right, so he dies at a good old age, right? I mean, yeah, he's an old guy, right? And I guess when you get that old, your time has come, and God's like, you know what, you come on, we're going. Okay. Now it's kind of weird to think about your own death that way, but we all know we have a destiny with death, and I suppose if you make it that long, you might as well schedule it, put it on the calendar, right? Tomorrow you're going to die, and we're going to, right? It does seem a little bit strange, but hey, I'm sure it's not the worst way to go. So it's probably quite a nice way to. He probably just fell asleep, and that was that. Okay, so next chapter here. The king of Arad, the Canaanite who dwelt in the south, heard that Israel was coming on the road to Atharim. Then he fought against Israel and took some of them prisoners. So Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver this people into my hand, they will utterly destroy their cities. And the Lord listened to the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites, and they utterly destroyed them in their cities. So the name of that place was called Hormah. Now, Hormah is from the word cherem, or like Hermon, right? So it means something that's devoted to destruction. Okay, and so that's how it gets its name, because it was devoted to destruction. Then they journeyed from Mount Hor by way of the Red Sea to go down to the land, to go around the land of Edom. All right, so they're down by the Red Sea, right? They're probably at the very tip, kind of by Eilat. That's probably the basic place, more or less. They're in that general area. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? Again, there's that broken record. For there's no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. Well, it's not worthless. It's actually manna. It's pretty good, and you can make it into a whole bunch of different stuff. But again, they're complaining instead of asking, right? You need to ask God, not complain. If there's something you don't have, then what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to ask him, right? Jesus said, look, which of you, if he has a son and his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, you give him a serpent or a scorpion, right? He says, which of you? So if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more does your Father in heaven give good things to those who, what's the word? Ask him, right? Because you got to ask. Don't complain. If you're just always complaining, oh God, I don't know why you don't give me these things. Oh God, this is so unfair. Oh God, I just can't believe you're not doing this. It gets really old. And yes, even the king of the universe is kind of like, I'm kind of sick of the mumbling and the grumbling, and just ask me. Okay. So if there's something you need, ask God. But then guess what you need to do? You need to ask in faith without doubting. So if you're like, God, I really need this, but then you're like, I don't know if God's going to do this. I don't know if he's going to come through. Well, what you're basically saying is, I can't trust God. So once again, you're slandering God. I have a book. It's in the works, Rethinking Prayer. I'm looking forward to getting it to you guys. So give me several more months to finish it. But the way we pray is so important. We see all these lessons throughout Scripture of how people were praying in a bad way. And yeah, it kind of annoyed God after a while. So notice what happens here. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Therefore, the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. Okay, so the people who were bitten were what? The people that were complaining. And it seems that a lot of the people were complaining, okay, right? So the people spoke against God and against Moses, right? They're all complaining. It seems that it's a very large amount of people that are complaining at this point. We're not told exactly, but it's a lot. Okay. And it says many of the people of Israel died, right? So many people were bit and then many died. So maybe not everybody who was bit died, but some died. All right. And so now they come to Moses. Sorry, I don't know what we were thinking. We were stupid. We really apologize for this. Please take away the serpents. All right. Now, what a strange recipe for salvation. Go make a bronze serpent. Okay. Why? Make a fiery serpent, set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So everyone who is bitten sinned against the Lord. Right? You probably see where I'm going with this. Everyone who was bitten was a person who had sinned against the Lord. And so someone who had sinned against the Lord, when they look at this, they're going to be healed and they're going to live. Well, so Moses made a bronze serpent, put it on a pole, and so it was. If a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. Okay, where are we going with this, right? You may ask. Well, obviously, to John chapter 3. You guys know the story. Nicodemus has come to Jesus and wondering, what is it that we need to do here? And so Jesus says, no one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man, who is in heaven. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So anybody who was bitten had sinned against the Lord, but when they looked at the bronze serpent, they were healed. All right, so anyone who looks to Jesus is anybody who has sinned, which is, hint, hint, everyone. Okay, so everyone who has sinned against the Lord, if they look to Yeshua, who is a type of this bronze serpent, can be healed. And it's weird, but it's beautiful, right? And again, this is one of the many object lessons that God has given us throughout the Bible. Now, why serpents? Well, serpents came in. Serpents often represent evil, not always, but many times they represent evil. And these were the kind of just reward for people that had sinned against the Lord. Right now, there's a whole bunch of stuff about serpents. Satan is the serpent. He's the dragon. All these different epithets that he has in the ancient world. And so basically, when they're sowing to unrighteousness, then guess what the fruit of that is? Unrighteousness, right? When you sowed unrighteousness, you reap unrighteousness. I think that's the basic idea. And they were sowing to unrighteousness, and then the bites of the serpent, the fire serpents, were actually were the harvest of what they were sowing. Okay, so then Jesus then becomes this picture of this. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Right. So again, Moses did not lift up the bronze serpent to condemn the people who had sinned against God, but that by looking to it, they might be saved. This is beautiful. And of course, it's Jesus, right? He's so masterfully weaving all of this together because, he's God. He's really pretty cool that way. All right. Now, it's interesting that this is also not just any kind of serpent, but this is a seraph. Okay. A seraph is a burning one. A seraph is a burning one. Now, where do we hear about this seraphim? Well, let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 6. So in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim, right? Seraphim, that's the same word. Okay, seraph, which are these fiery serpents, and seraphim are exactly the same thing. One is just plural, one is singular. Okay. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. So did God send these supernatural beings? to bite the people, very possibly. Now, it's interesting. In Isaiah chapter 6, they have 6 wings. In Ezekiel chapter 1, they have 4 wings. I'm convinced that seraphim and kruvim or cherubim are exactly the same thing. The only thing I can't quite figure out is the number of wings. All right, that one kind of stumps me. But I'm supposing there must be something that has to do with perspective that maybe we're not getting. All right, so as Ezekiel sees these creatures, they have the 4 faces. They've got wings. They have different likeness. The ox, the eagle, the lion, and the face of a man as well. It says their wings stretched upward. 2 wings of each. 1 touched one another, and 2 covered their bodies. Maybe he didn't see the other 2 that were covering their feet. Possibly, I don't know. I'm just not sure. And each one went straight forward. They went wherever the Spirit wanted them to go. Okay, as for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire. Well, that sounds like something that's burning, like a saraf, right? So that's the same basic idea. And it says the fire was bright, and out of the fire went lightning. All right, so all of this stuff to explain what they look like. Now, the other reason that I would suggest that they're one and the same thing is from Revelation chapter 4. Do you remember what they say in Isaiah chapter 6, right? They say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. Well, in Revelation chapter 4, here John is seeing this incredible vision up in the heavens. And he says, the 4 living creatures, each one having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within, and they do not rest day or night, saying, holy, 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 who was and is to come. All right, so what we get from here is that their faces are exactly the faces that we see in Ezekiel chapter 1, which we don't see in Isaiah chapter 6. But then the number of wings is what we get from Isaiah chapter 6, but not from Ezekiel chapter 1. All right, so again, I'm not quite sure how to resolve this. My suggestion is that probably the wings of the feet Ezekiel did not report on. That's what I am supposing, but I could be wrong. But what they cry is exactly what we hear of the seraphim in Isaiah chapter 6, right? And these are the creatures, apparently, that God sent to bite the children of Israel. Right? It's kind of a bummer, okay? All right, so, right? Vayishlach Adonai ba'am ish anachashim, right? Hasrafim, right? So this is the word serpents, and this is the word fiery. Okay, and then he says, therefore make a fiery. It just says aselecha saraf, right? So it just says make a fiery saraf, right? So it doesn't say the word snake. It just says fiery. So again, some question marks here. It may not be that they're exactly the same creature. These could just be some kind of garden variety snake that you find on planet Earth. And maybe they have a fiery appearance, but I'm suspicious. I would suggest that there's something more here, and it's probably related to the creatures that we just looked at, right? The cherubim and the kruvim. Okay, and so this is, we put on this pole, Jesus that then becomes the embodiment of this sign, this type, and then people have to look to it to be saved. They have to look to Yeshua ultimately to be saved. All right. Now the children of Israel moved on and camped at Ovot, and they journeyed from Ovot and camped at Iye Abarim in the wilderness, which is east of Moab toward the sunrise. From there, they moved and camped in the valley of Zered. From there, they moved and camped on the other side of the Arnon, which is in the wilderness that extends from the border of the Amorites. For the Arnon is the border of Moab, between Moab and the Amorites. Therefore, it says in the book of the wars of the Lord, Waheb and Suphah, the brooks of the Arnon, and the slope of the brooks that reaches to the dwelling of Ar and lies on the border of Moab. I wish we had that book, but I have no idea where it is. And even if it showed up today, I'd be a little bit suspicious unless we were to dig it out of the ground in Israel. Otherwise, I'd be quite suspicious. And from there, they went to Be'er, not beer. Okay, I heard somebody pronounce this as beer. It's not beer. It's Be'er, which is a well. which is the well where the Lord said to Moses, gather the people together and I will give them water. Then Israel sang this song, spring up, O well. All of you sing it, sing to it. Okay, so this again, in the Targumim, this is where they're talking about this rock that followed them. Okay, then the well the leaders sank, dug by the nation's nobles, by the lawgiver with their staves, and from the wilderness they went to Mattanah, from Mattanah to Nahaliel, and from Nahaliel to Bamot, and from Bamot in the valley that is in the country of Moab to the top of Pisgah, which looks down on the wasteland. That's where Moses is going to go to eventually die. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through your land. We will not turn aside into fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory. But Sihon would not allow Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and went out against Israel and the wilderness and came to Yahaz and fought against Israel. Then Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword and took possession of his land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, as far as the people of Ammon, to the border of the people of Ammon. For the border of the people of Ammon was fortified. So Israel took all these cities, and Israel dwelt in all the cities of the Amorites in Heshbon and all its villages. Again, remember the Amorites were the people that God said to Abraham that your descendants will be slaves because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And God says in Amos 2:9 that it was I who destroyed the Amorites, whose height was like the height of the cedar trees and whose strength was in the roots beneath. Okay, so this tells us that these were pretty tall dudes. For Heshbon was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab and had taken all his land from him as far as the Arnon. Okay, so Sihon, king of the Amorites, had taken the land from the former king of Moab, and now Israel's taking it back. Therefore, those who speak in Proverbs say, come to Heshbon, let it be built, let the city of Sihon be repaired. For fire went out from Heshbon, a flame from the city of Sihon. It consumed Ar of Moab, the lords of the heights of the Arnon. Woe to you, Moab! You have perished, O people of Chemosh. He has given his sons as fugitives and his daughters into captivity to Sihon, king of the Amorites. Now, the god of the Moabites, Chemosh, we're going to learn about him later. Sadly, Moses is going to set up a shrine to the king of, or the god of Chemosh, also known as Molech, and this is where they would sacrifice innocent little babies to this terrible god, and they would burn them. Despicable. But we have shot at them. Heshbon has perished as far as Dibon. Then we laid waste as far as Nophah, which reaches to Medeba. Thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites. Then Moses went to spy out Yazer, and they took its villages and drove out the Amorites who were there. And they turned and went up by the way to Bashan. So Og, king of the Bashan in the Hebrew, went out against them, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. All right, now, in Ugaritic literature, they talk about a deified king of the dead named Og, who dwelt in Edrei and Ashtoret, and whose holy mountain was Mount Hermon. All right, so that's quite interesting, isn't it? This is about 1400 BC when we have these documents. Just so happens that, hey, all this stuff is happening in the Bible, right? So we have an external validation of what the Bible says. We don't need it, but it sure is cool when we get it, right? That's really exciting stuff. Again, if you want to dig deeper into that, that's all in Corrupting the Image, Volume 2. I think you're going to love it. So check it out. Now, the word Bashan is terribly interesting because the word Bashan does not come to us from Hebrew, but it's actually coming from an Akkadian word, which is Bashmu, and Bashmu means a snake dragon. Okay, so that in light of what we had just read about these fiery serpents, now you have Og, king of the Bashan, which is the land of the snake dragons or the dragon snakes, however you want to see that. And what you find in northern Israel, there's a place called Gilgal Rephaim, the circle of the Rephaim, just about a quarter mile north of that, there is a geoglyph of a snake. It's approximately, I think it's about a third of a mile in length. It's huge. And you can see it from the air. You can look down and see this massive geoglyph that looks like a snake. but it also looks like a Bashan, or it looks like a Bashmu, which is a snake dragon. All right. And so Bashan is a very significant name. Mount Hermon is also known as the mountain of Bashan. Check this out. I got to show you guys this. It's so cool. All right. So Psalm 68 talks about this. It says, a mountain of God is the mountain of Bashan. A mountain of many peaks is the mountain of Bashan. Why do you fume with envy, you mountains of many peaks? This is the God which God desires. This is the mountain which God desires to dwell in. Yes, the Lord will dwell in it forever. All right. Now, when you think about this place, Mount Hermon, this is according to the book of Enoch, where the 200 angels came down back in the days of Jared. Also, Charles Warren found a stele on top of Mount Hermon, which is now resides in the British Museum. I would love to go and see that myself. It would be really quite exciting to do that. Maybe one of these days. But again, I talk about this in Corrupting the Image 2. That document, I had the honor of retranslating it because some of the previous translators had missed some words. And turns out there's the secret name of Enlil, which is called Batios, which means death, and it's all related. Okay, so there's so many different little connections. I can't bring them all out to you right now, but I'm trying to just give you a sample that it was Mount Hermon, which is where, according to Ugarit, the Ugaritic text, where you have this deified god of the dead named Og, right? And it was at that same place where the 200 angels came down back in Noah's day. Well, guess what else happened there? Jesus took Peter, James, and John up to the top of a very high mountain, which was just next door to Caesarea Philippi, which was where, guess what was? The gates of Hades were, right? It's like crazy how it all goes together, right? So he took them up there, and that is where he transfigured. And what he was doing is saying, this is now my mountain, not your mountain, my mountain, right? And he was really staking his claim. This is my piece of real estate, not yours. I'm taking it back. I love it. It's so cool. All right. And then just to kind of give you a little icing on the cake here, Psalm 22. This ought to blow your mind. All right. So we know that this is talking about Jesus on the cross, crazy stuff. Be not far from me, for trouble is near. There's none to help. And then it goes into this weird thing about Bashan. For many bulls have surrounded me, strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. All right, so this is the word parim, bulls, but this word here, strong bulls of Bashan, the word strong and bulls in the Hebrew. All right, so Svavavuni parim, okay, so that's just cows, bulls. But then you have Abire Bashan. So the word Abire, it is referring to bulls, yes, but it's referring to angelic bulls. We looked at Psalm 78 and it talked about how men ate angels' food. The word angel there is abirim. It's the same word that we have right here, abire bashan. Right? So it's not just talking about, animals with horns, we call ox or bulls. This is talking about some spiritual being who are often represented as bulls. Okay. Think about, well, there's so many examples, okay, but Baal was many times referred to as a bull. He's also known as Zeus. Zeus appeared one time as a bull, and he went and took Europa and took her and did some naughty things with her. Okay, so all of this stuff is all related. Okay, so the whole idea of bulls, but bulls of where? Bulls of Bashan, right? Or these divine, or well, let's just call them fallen angels or demons of Bashan have encircled me. So Jesus went up on top of Mount Hermon. He said, this is my mountain. Then they get him on the cross and they're like, oh no, we're winning, you're losing, right? And this is what's happening here in Bashan. Now I could go on and on about Bashan, but for the sake of time, I'm going to have to just call it a day, sadly. But King Og of Bashan, bad dude. So we see that they defeat him. King Og was probably about 15 feet tall. You can read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 3. Or if you want to check out Corrupting Image Volume 3, You'll enjoy that as well. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hand with all his people and his land. So you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon." So they defeated him, his sons, and all his people until there was no survivor left him, and they took possession of his land. And now, verse 1, then the children of Israel moved and camped in the plains of Moab on the side of the Jordan across from Jericho. Wow. Okay, we did it. All right, we got through all that in an hour. That was pretty exciting. All right, so guys, I want to just go back and just check out your questions. Boy, there's a lot of fun stuff in there. Yeah, I could have taken more time. How long did Israel stay in Egypt? Someone has a question. Roughly 400 years. Okay. And here's a question. Kind of a comment. I'm going to leave that one, Shemin. I think you're, I don't know, well qualified. Well, let me see. Okay, isn't the red heifer sacrifice a little like Yeshua's sacrifice on the cross? Yes, indeed. The priest is throwing into the fire hyssop, scarlet, and cedar, and these are also at the crucifixion. That's a good observation. Thank you for that. I don't have anything to add to that because that's a great observation. Okay. Nana from Montana says, wood ashes contain some lye, and lye is what we have in soap. That's interesting. I did not know that. Thank you for pointing that out. Praise Adonai says, everything about the red heifer points to the forgiveness and restoration provided by Yeshua as a Passover lamb who died on the cross. A very important teaching. No question about that. Very good. Yes. This is from Jennifer Ofner. Weird question. Why does the Western Church worship God without bowing down all the way down on their faces? Is the act of bowing relevant for today? Well, Jennifer, I don't know why we don't do that. I think if it were commanded to bow down to our faces, then I think we would probably do it. I don't see a specific command that we're supposed to do that. And I think that's probably the reason we don't do that. So I'm definitely open to hearing about that. Okay. So very good. Shemin has a comment. She says, if I can bring it up, it was probably the only rock around. It says the rock, like it's obvious which one. Of course, this was in the desert of Kadesh, probably with sand and open spaces. Could be. Jennifer says, why does, okay, I think I did that one already. Okay, let me keep going. This is a question from the God I Know. Says, do you think there's a reason why God told Moses to take his rod, even though he wasn't supposed to use it? Why not just have him leave it in the tent? That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. The best I could do is speculate the mind of God, and that's always a dangerous place to go. So probably I won't answer that, but it's an interesting question. Yes. Very good. Very good. Thank you, guys. I love your questions. So glad that you're tuning in. If you can go to Israel with us in 2024, that'd be fantastic. So the link is in the chat. So definitely check that out. Hope you will join us tomorrow for Prophecy Roundtable. And of course, this Shabbat, I will be continuing with the story of Gideon. Oh boy, it's a tough one because here God is going to take away a bunch of stuff so he can actually use Gideon. Not one of those really exciting messages because God's taking away, and I never like it when God takes away, quite frankly. I always like the fruit afterward, but I never like it in the process. And so we're going to see that God's going to do that with Gideon. He's going to strengthen him, but he's going to have to take a bunch of stuff away, like, most of his army. Okay. So there you have to trust in the Lord and not trust in yourself. All right. God